John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com. We're going to talk some football. We got a lot of football topics on the table. What was your favorite Philly sports team in the last 20 years? We're flashing back to the best seasons, including the 04 Eagles, John. And we asked the question. I don't think you were covering the Eagles at that time, but what made that 2004 Eagles team so much fun and so special?
Well, when you talk about favorite teams, for me, I saw your poll. I would say the 2000-2001 Sixers, I think it was, who went to the finals. But I think it involves personalities, and obviously personalities start with Allen Iverson in this town, and I think you look at some of the personalities on that team. Terrell Owens, obviously, first and foremost, and I think that's what people sort of gravitate towards.
Yeah, it's funny. You had AI, you have TO, and initials speak loud in this city sometimes, and right there, two of probably the most colorful, outlandish characters. And right now, by the way, the poll question is up. The 08 Phillies, the one team that won the championship of the group, they're leading the way with 51%. That Sixers team is second at 26%. The Eagles, I'm surprised that Eagles team is coming in third right now. Maybe it's just because people are all Sixer, got it in their veins at this point. But typically, the football team conquers all, right? So the fact that 04 Eagles team is not, at least in second place, I understand they didn't win, but I was a little surprised by that.
Well, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. I think if you put that same poll up in September, you might get a different result when everybody is sort of eagled up. And you're right, coming off the draft and coming off the summer league, you guys know how much interest there's been in the Sixers recently. So I think that's kind of timing related. But I think it's good, though. I'm a little surprised that the Phillies are winning, and I think it's good that people are recognizing, hey, that's the team that won the darn championship, so they should be first.
John, an email fresh in my box here at 4:05 from one Brett Strohshacker over at the Eagles. Eagles media schedule, Monday, July 24th. Practice begins 8:50 a.m. Rookies, quarterbacks, selected veterans. That's when it all begins. So we're getting closer here, as we know, less than 2 weeks away from the start of Eagles training camp. They'll practice Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, Friday, the whole week there. And then they'll have that Saturday open practice at Lincoln Financial Field. So what is happening between now and then? It seems like these guys are still, the quarterback and the receivers, they're out in North Dakota. What are some of the other guys doing?
Well, they're enjoying their final days away because it's a grind, and it starts obviously right away for the rookies and the quarterbacks. And you have that ramp-up period now in the NFL. Back in the old days, you would report and you'd be in pads the next day and have two-a-day practices. Now you sort of have that ramp-up period. You're not allowed to put on pads. You're not allowed to play press coverage or have any contact until the third day, I believe. So, guys are just enjoying their final few weeks of not having to go through this grind, because once it starts, it's not over until, January 1st, basically. And you hope to go farther than that, because obviously you want to make the playoffs and you want to go deep in the playoffs. But, I mean, it is difficult. Even in today's training camp, which, I say is not nearly as difficult as it used to be, it's still really, really tough on the players.
John, I want to get into some topics that we threw out on Twitter today as well, one of which we touched on the offense yesterday, which was who was the guy who will step up on offense for the Eagles. Who's that guy on defense that is the guy who will need to step up? Who's the guy that has to have the big year on the defensive side of the ball? I gave the listeners a couple of options. One was Jordan Hicks, one was Fletcher Cox, one was Brandon Graham. I think they're the three highlighted guys. The fourth option was other. Who's the guy for you that needs to step up this year?
Well, it's different. To me, I wouldn't look towards those guys because I expect them to play at a high level. And I think
wouldn't you say that Fletcher Cox maybe needs to step up a little, or at least a little?
Well, I think people often, and the same with Brandon Graham last year, people who don't realize how good Brandon was will point to the sack number and say he wasn't that effective, but he was a second-team All-Pro. And I think Fletcher Cox was in that same category. I think he played very well, just that because of his contract, people expect the big sack numbers. And the Eagles need to improve. There's no question there, but I think he played very well. I think he earned his money, so to speak, and I think he's one of the top defensive tackles in football. I don't think that's going to change. I don't think that's going to change for Brandon. I think Jordan Hicks is going to play pretty well. But I look for a guy who has to step up, and I think it's got to be Jalen Mills at cornerback because the Eagles are, penciling him in as their top corner. And that's a second-year player who was a seventh-round pick who played, let's be kind, not well last year at times, and all of a sudden you got him as your lockdown corner. So I look at that defense, and I see talent at all three levels. You mentioned three of them. You can add Malcolm Jenkins, Rodney McLeod, Nigel Bradham, Tim Jernigan, who the people are going to see is a very good player. You even have some depth with Derek Barnett as a first-round pick and Chris Long coming in. But look at the cornerbacks. I mean, this guy has to step up for this Eagles defense to be where it wants to be.
John McMullen's with us, 97.3 ESPN.com. Just to kind of piggyback with yesterday, we asked about offense. Today we talked a little defense. Which unit's stronger?
I think the defense is stronger. You have there. I say it all the time. Of the best players on the Eagles, the most of them are on the defensive side, and we just mentioned the names. Fletcher's certainly top five. Brandon's top five. Jordan Hicks is arguably top five, and maybe even Malcolm Jenkins is top five. And the only guy who's going to crack that from the offense is Lane Johnson. And maybe Alshon Jeffrey can push to that point if he plays well. Maybe Jason Peters at 35 years old. Who knows? Maybe he's got another great season in him. But those are all question marks. I think specifically with those four, that core group, those are really, really good football players. And so I think the defense as a whole has better players with one glaring weakness, and that's the cornerback position.
Maybe the most important position in on the defensive side of the ball?
Yeah, I mean, it's always a symbiotic relationship between the pass rush and pass coverage. And that's with everyone, everywhere in the league. But with the Eagles, let's face it, they better get a pass rush because they need to protect those guys on the outside. And I think if there's a particular week where you aren't getting the pass rush, you're going to see how bad things are outside the numbers unless the Eagles can pull off a miracle in the next couple of weeks, whether it's via trade, picking up somebody on waivers, maybe later in the season, Sidney Jones getting healthy, or, guys like Rasul Douglas and Jalen Mills, who I just mentioned, overachieving.
By the way, our Pulse question's up at 973ESPN.com. We asked you who will be the player to stand out on defense. A little different from step up, but stand out. If I was to ask you, who is the player who will stand out on the defense this year? Different kind of wording. Same guys, Hicks, Cox, Graham?
Yeah, I think you would look at him. You have to always add Malcolm to that mix as well. Could be in that category. But if I look at the two guys, to me, the two best defensive players on the Eagles remain Fletcher Cox and Brandon Graham. I thought Jordan Hicks was great last year. He was great, but it's almost tough. You almost have to it's sort of like how I feel Dak Prescott's going to happen in Dallas. You almost have to have a market correction. You can't have that kind of production year after year after year. And I'm not sure he's going to be able to follow up as far as the big splash plays. But I think Fletcher and Brandon Graham are going to be really consistent, good football players.
Jordan Hicks is winning that poll, 52%. Fletcher Cox at 20. Other at 16. Brandon Graham at 12. I've said before, I think Jordan Hicks is ready to be the face of the defense. Like, maybe not all pro, but maybe consideration for all pro.
Well, he should have been in that consideration last year. That's how well he played.
I'll say, is he that good? Is he that good for you?
Yeah, I mean, he's tremendously instinctive. That's the thing that impresses me the most. I mean, he is the quarterback of the defense. So he has that going for him as well. As far as impact, I mean, he's the guy who's got to get everybody lined up correctly, make sure everybody's in the proper gap. If Jim Schwartz wants to switch things and change things around before the snap of the football, he's the guy. He's got to make sure everybody's on the same page. So he's obviously very, very important to this team. And, hey, I would love to see him have another year like he had last season. You still have in the back of your mind about the injury issues, and I'm not talking about the broken finger slipping, outside the pool in his honeymoon. I'm talking about dating back to college when it's been tough for him to stay on the field. Last year was the first time he did it, and he excelled at a really, really high level. I'm just a little – it's tough. It's tough to back up. He was so good last season. To me, it's going to be very, very difficult to put together another season like that.
Talking with John McMullen, getting ready for Eagles camp, which starts on Monday, July 24th, 97.3 ESPN, your home for Eagles football. That was one of our poll questions. Who will be the person to step up on defense? Who needs to step up on defense? And, John, you're right. The secondary is such a question mark for them. And, you said unless they can figure out a way to add a veteran or something to that mix, it could be a very frustrating year because they do have some nice pieces. The safety spot's very good with Fletcher Cox. Let me ask you about Fletcher Cox. So he seemed to get off to a great start last year, and then he kind of tailed off a little bit or whatever you want to say. I think a lot of people thought it's almost like the Andre Iguodala syndrome, right? You sign that contract, you better be the best player. Is he kind of the contract? Does the contract speak louder than his play?
Yeah, the expectations. I talk about it all the time. They're raised when you sign contracts like that. He was the highest paid defensive tackle in the history of football. Once he signed that deal, depending on the numbers. Some say he was a little bit behind in Ndamukong Suh, but either way, he was right there. And once Aaron Donald signs, he'll probably get more. But any time you have those types of expectations, I talked about it on the show a couple of weeks ago with Derek Carr, it adds to it. And people expect things, and they expect numbers. And it's tough to rush the passer as an interior guy. You're not going to have consistent double-digit sack seasons because it's easier to double team. And obviously, Fletcher Cox is a guy who gets a lot of attention. And that's one question he's always asked about is the frustration of getting consistent double teams. But when that happens, the other guys have to open it up. And I think last year, Brandon Graham excelled, but the other guys on the pass rush, specifically Benny Logan, Vinny Curry, I don't think they did enough. And I think the hope is the Eagles have added enough. Jernigan's a better pass rusher than Benny Logan. He might not be as good as a run stuffer. And then you bring in Derek Barnett, who's a natural pass rusher. Hopefully it's a better package. And that'll make everyone better, including Fletcher Cox.
John, another poll question we asked the listeners today. Which NFC East quarterback will have the best season this year? Prescott, Cousins, Wentz, Manning. No surprise, Wentz far and away leading 65%. Is that accurate?
Well, it depends what your version of success is. If you're talking about numbers, it's going to be Kirk Cousins. I mean, Washington can throw the football, and they're going to throw it again. And even though they lost to Sean Jackson and Pierre Garçon, they still have Jordan Reed. They got Terrell Pryor. Josh Doxson's a former first-round pick. Jamison Crowder's a great slot receiver. And Kirk Cousins is a proven commodity. I know people don't like to admit that or say that, and I have no idea why. But as far as numbers, he's going to be the best. As far as winning, hey, I think the Cowboys are going to come back to the pack at least a little bit, but that's the most talented team, at least offensively, up and down. You have the tremendous offensive line. You have the tremendous running back. They have a great receiving core. So they have all the pieces in place. The Eagles, on the other hand, are much improved, but you still have to see how it works out. The New York Giants, hey, their offensive line and running game still looks really bad on paper.
Yeah, and obviously Carson Wentz, we talked about him yesterday, has maybe the most pressure of the Eagles. But how about Dak Prescott, man? That second year, do you think he takes a big step forward, or do more people figure him out, find out more about him? Is their offensive line as good? I mean, what's your read on Prescott moving forward?
I think he's going to be a really good player moving forward, but I think he's going to take a bit of a step back. I mean, he was tremendous last season. And what we always talk about in the NFL is that it's a copycat league, and it generally is, but it's a really slow-moving copycat league. And once the campaign is over, what do opposing defensive coordinators do? They spend their entire offseason coming up with plans to stop you if you're on their schedule. Remember, at this time last year, Dak Prescott was similar to Carson Wentz. He was the Cowboys' third quarterback. He was not going to play, and people forget this fact. Forget about Tony Romo. Kellen Moore was the backup quarterback, and he was going to play, but he also got hurt. So a number of things sort of had to fall in place for Dak Prescott to even get his chance. Nobody expected him to play. Even less people expected him to play well. And he obviously excelled beyond anyone's expectations. But guys are going to prepare for him this time. And I think it is going to be more difficult for him.
Yep. I think that's more of him and Wentz are obviously going to be tied together because they're rookies, but Wentz, higher profile, but Prescott plays on a higher profile team, right? There's no question about that.
Yeah. I mean, the Forbes valuations just came out today, the top 50 sports franchises. I wrote about it on 973ESPN.com. The Eagles are worth $2.5 billion. The Cowboys are worth $4.2, the most valued sports franchise in the world. That's who the Dallas Cowboys are. It's America's team. It's high profile, and it's much more high profile than the Philadelphia Eagles. So, yeah, from that standpoint, it's a greater microscope for Dak Prescott.
Yep, and I'm really interested to see the step he takes forward. Whether or not it was a lot of I thought he played pretty well, but later on in the year, it seemed that he, especially in the playoffs, did not have the same impact that he had, and of course.
Well, I got to tell you, that was the most impressive part of his rookie season to me was the playoff loss, and I'll tell you why. Because they went in against a buzzsaw. You remember how hot Aaron Rodgers was at the time.
Yep.
And the Packers just blitzed them, and the game was over. And Dak brought that team back and was very calm and very collected, and he had the Cowboys in the position to win the game. And I think Mason Crosby hit I think it was a 51-yard field goal. So to me, in a losing effort, he proved a lot.
No, I agree with you. I like the kid. I thought it was interesting, though, that you would see some Cowboy fans, even their own fans, saying, well, Romo would have made some of these. Like, there was plays that I guess that he missed, or, some reads that he didn't make, and it seemed that people were critical. I'm thinking, this kid's a rookie. Calm down.
Yeah, he did struggle a little bit down the stretch in the regular season, and he wasn't quite the same. And it looked like specifically the game, I think it was a Thursday night game in Minnesota when Mike Zimmer wasn't there. The Vikings really shut him down, and I think people kind of speculated from that point that they gave him the blueprint to the other teams in the NFL. But he bounced back in that game. Now, granted, it was against a really bad Packers defense. They were injured and beat up and didn't have a lot of talent to begin with. But I still, on that type of stage, and playing against Aaron Rodgers, who's just sort of throwing the haymakers in the first quarter and just knocks you down. To not waver and to bring your team back, I just thought that was really, really impressive, and I think it speaks to him. But while I say that, I think he's going to have much more trouble in the second season.
Yep, and we'll see the two second-year guys, and it begins for the Eagles July 24th, Carson Wentz and, of course, Dak Prescott. Those two guys for the next, who knows, 7, 8, 15, who knows how many years they go at it, but that should be fun. And then, of course, you got Eli, the old guy, the old veteran, trying to continue to bring the Giants back to the playoffs, and then Cousins, who maybe has – all these guys have some magnitude of pressure on them. Can Prescott do what he did last year? Can Wentz now win with the weapons they've given him? Cousins has the contract situation looming over his head, and Eli's running out of time.
Yeah, they all do. But I wouldn't mind being Kirk Cousins. I mean, the second year he's making $24 million this year, and if he even plays, to franchise him again, it's 144% increase, not increase, but if you franchise a guy for the third consecutive year, which nobody does for this particular reason. You don't have to give him a 10% raise. It goes up to where Kirk Cousins will be paid over $30 million. So obviously the Redskins can't afford to do that.
Yeah.
Either way, the guy is going to make a ton of money, whether it's in Washington or somewhere else.
He's John McMullen at JF McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com, covers the Eagles, and he will be at the NovaCare Center on the 24th of July when the Eagles open camp, and we will be getting into it here on the Sports Bash. Thank you, John.
Hey, thank you, Mike.